In 1983, I bought my first Volkswagen, and then when my son was ready to turn 16 in 1986, we bought this gray one that's coming up right here. And one thing led to another, and we built more and more Volkswagens, and bought more Volkswagens, started going to car shows, and it's always been just a hobby. I never worked on Volkswagens for the public, just me and my son did it as a father and son thing. I did all the work on the cars you see here. I did the paint, interior, headliner, engine, body work. I did it all. This is a car we're going to lower today, a 1970 model. We're going to lower the front and the rear about 2 inches. First thing to do, remove all 4 wheels. These are the Monroe Air Shocks we'll be using. And this is 2 solid bars that replace the spring sets. You don't have to have an adjustable angle gauge like this, but it sure comes in handy. You could use a protractor or make a reference mark. This is really the only special tool you'll need to remove the axles from the IRS. Be sure to remove all the grease and dirt from those screws before using this tool. And here is a photo of the stock front suspension. This is the way to remove the spindle without special tools. Put your nut back on the studs to prevent damaging the threads. Use a hammer and hit where the red arrow shows, and this may take a little time, but eventually they'll pop loose. Do not hit the ball joint studs. Make a scribe mark as shown so you can keep your front end alignment. Now the spindle and drum is removed. Don't let this assembly hang by the brake hose. Support it. You need to remove the sway bar by driving off these tapered retaining clips. You can see the tab on each clip that has to be bent before you can drive that clip off. It's a locking tab. You can see a slight taper here. Now the sway bar has been removed, and you may not be able to use it. Depends on how low you drop your bug. Remove these Allen screws that lock your trailing arms onto the springs. These screws are 8mm Allen head. With the lower trailing arm removed, you can see the rusty spring set. Now both the trailing arms are out of the way. Remove the spring locking screws called grub screws. I've reversed a socket on an extension to tap those spring sets out. As rusty as the lower spring set was, we had to put a trailing arm back on the spring set to help pull and tap. Evidently water had accumulated in that lower tube, so be sure and clean all that rusty grease out and put new grease on the seals before you put your trailing arms back in, as shown here. All 4 trailing arms need to be drilled with a 1/2-inch hole as shown here. Install the solid steel bar between your trailing arms. Now there's a threaded spacer that you use an Allen screw with to tighten, to lock it, and it goes right here. There is a nylon washer underneath that threaded spacer, and then your nylock nut, a nylon locking nut. After replacing the trailing arms, then you need to put your sway bar back on. Use a C-clamp or vice grips or large channel locks to squeeze where the X is so you can put the clips back on. After installing the tapered clips, bend the locking tab down. Be sure that your scribe mark on the camber adjusting nut is lined up. Okay, now for the rear. Be sure and clean your IRS axle screws out real good with a very small screwdriver so that your special tool will go all the way in as not to strip out. Depending on how low you go, you may have to trim away some of the area shown in the photo. Using a bar or an extension between the lugs to hold the hub will enable you to loosen the axle screws easier. And again, this is a special tool that you need. And if the hole is clean, the tool will go all the way in. Make a scribe mark shown here so as not to lose your wheel alignment. Remove your shock bolt shown by the yellow rectangle and remove the snubber just by pulling it off. You may or may not have to remove this brake clip. I did so because I needed more travel for that swing arm to come down and I didn't want to break my flexible hose. Okay, now the swing arm is completely loose and down and out of the way as far as it can go without stretching the brake line. The bolts you see here on the spring plate will be used to hook a chain to. You could probably just pry that spring plate back off and let it drop, but I used a bar as shown here and some chain hooked to that torsion bar plate, and using the shock tower here as shown here in this photo. This spring plate rests on a ledge, and once you remove the torsion bar caps, you need to pry that spring plate off the ledge and let it drop. Like I say, I eased it down with a bar, and here's a bearing removal tool I used to pull that spring plate back. You could use this special angle tool, or you could use a protractor, or you could make a reference mark like I've done here. What it boils down to is that one notch on the inner torsion bar splines equals about 1.5 inches. We dropped it 2 notches, and that gave us a total of 3-inch drop in the rear. Yours may vary some, but that's about the way it went with this. Now I've pulled that torsion bar plate completely out, and I'll turn it 2 notches. And again, I'm showing the snubber, which just pulls off. Just twist it and pull it right off. I used a C-clamp to push that torsion bar plate and torsion bar back into the splines. I used the tool previously shown to line up the bolt holes. And this is before we did the drop. And this is after we did the drop. Now to give you a little bit more information about this job, on the rear, those torsion bar spring plates, those rubber bushings and the end caps, lube them real good with WD-40 because they're really hard to pry off. And on the front suspension, the only spring that you'll have will be the air shocks. And if you don't have any air in the air shocks, it's going to be bottomed out and it's going to ride like a buckboard, so you have to put air in it. But with enough air in the shocks to keep it from bottoming out, my son said that it's about a 3.5-inch drop on the front. Now later on, should my son decide to drop it more, we're probably going to have to go to the special ball joints for lowered front ends, and we're going to have to go to dropped spindles. But with enough air in these front shocks, my son says it rides great, rides just as good as it did. If we decide to lower it more with lowered spindles and lower ball joints, I'll do another video on it showing you how to do that too. Thanks for watching this video. Hope it's been a big help to you.